All right, well, welcome again to the Living Streams Church podcast and this summer of 2026, where we're focusing on what it means to be human in our Being Human series with this Being Human podcast companion. And as always, got Anthony Kennada here. How are you doing, Anthony?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing real well. Representing the New York over there. It's pretty good.
That's right.
And we also have a guest I've been super excited about, been actually thinking about it all summer. We have Presley Reeder. How you doing, Presley?
I'm great, David. Thanks for thinking about me.
Yeah. It's been good. And we just spent the last, 15 minutes trying to get the audio figured out, but we are ready to go now and excited about today. Just a reminder, thanks for tuning in. We're looking at what it means to be human, trying to get rooted in a biblical anthropology. What is humanity, so that we can not get disoriented or deceived by whatever comes in the AI age. And we say that not saying all AI is bad. We don't think that at all. We actually think it'll be very interesting and hopefully really fun. But there are some things that we'll just need to pay attention to. And so if we know what the Bible says humanity is all about and what human flourishing is, then we'll be able to help that as we go into the future instead of lose sight of that. And then also the dehumanizing political age that we're in. We want to make sure we stand against the dehumanizing and not just participate in it. And so understanding what it means to be human is a really good idea, I think, always, but probably really good right now. And then another little component of that is this idea of the intersection of work, tech, and faith, and how those three things are converging in the life of everyone. Right now, all over the world in interesting ways, because tech is a disruptor. It's definitely changing the game in some ways, and yet work and faith are such important parts of humanity, and all of us are in this kind of middle-ish life. In the Lord of the Rings, they were in Middle Earth, and that's where we are too, in the Middle Age, and we're at the peak of our powers. Let's say, people always talking trash about Middle Ages, but we're at the peak of our powers, right? And we're trying to figure out how to navigate this intersection, work, tech, and faith in interesting ways. And we've all developed skills that we want to continue to use to pay the bills. We also have families and a soul that we want to nurture and take care of. And one of the things I love about both of you is I've walked with you, I've talked with you guys, we've connected, and I've heard you processing these in what I think is such beautiful, healthy ways. Mm-hmm. And you're so awake, alive, and aware in this moment. And so we want to be companions to those other people who are in those spaces. But also I think about the 20-year-olds who are coming up, graduating high school or thinking about career, work, faith, and tech, and wanting to do what we can to help, guide them in some ways, even though we're still trying to figure this out. But then also maybe somebody who's getting towards retirement and they're trying to figure out, like, do I just quit right now because the game's getting too crazy, or can I kind of slowly continue to work or find meaningful work, even in a different age, with the digital revolution, all those things. So I just think it's such a fascinating topic. We see new stuff coming out all the time, each week. We've been talking about what's the latest tech you've seen, or what's the newest thing going on. But we're going to continue that conversation today. And Presley, I'm really excited about people getting to know you and where you're at and what your thoughts are right now. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about where you're at, like in that intersection of those things and at this point in your life.
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, apparently I'm in Middle Earth.
Middle age.
Definitely squarely in middle age. I don't know if I'm at the peak of my powers, to be honest, but I'm squarely in Gen X. I feel like the generations have become like kind of important recently in a way that they weren't before. So it's like you have to say, I'm 47, I'm a Gen Xer. And that tells people something, not everything about me and certainly not about others. But anyway, I've got been married for 23 years. I've got 3 kids, 18, 16, and 15. So they're getting ready to be those 20-year-olds that you were talking
They
about.
think that they're at the peak of their powers right now.
We were just having that conversation. Yes, yes, they do, and I did too at that age, right? So I understand a little bit, but yeah. So that's kind of personally been following the Lord since I was a junior in high school, and so there's a lot, hopefully, to draw on there. And professionally, without going all the way back, I think the most relevant thing for this is that for the last 13 years, I owned and operated a caregiving business where we staffed caregivers in the home for the elderly, and they would go in and take care of those folks when they had a short-term or a long-term need, and sometimes all the way up through the point where they passed. And so that was a very intense experience over 13 years in a lot of ways. I learned a lot from kind of operating in a season of life with people that, we just kind of, I think in America at least, have put that season aside a little bit for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it's the elderly who put that aside. They've moved out to communities and to be around their peers, but then they find themselves isolated. Anyway, there's just a lot that I learned and that the Lord taught me through those 13 years. But I sold that business last year. So now I'm looking to fill that space, right? The space that was left by that. And I was telling Anthony earlier, like, you kind of don't know how to talk to people about it always. I mean, I sold it for, just to be honest, like less than $1 million. So I'm not buying an island or anything, but I do have financial space to process it and think about making a wise choice on really how to use that time that got freed up when I sold the business. So I've been praying, I've been reading, I've been talking to people like you guys who have wisdom. I've been getting on podcasts, and hopefully this won't just be a self-help session, but there'll be some wisdom I can share. So that's where I am right now.
Yeah, and it's been so funny to be with. I mean, Presley and I are good friends, and just to see him in this spot. And I think what last summer was the summer of press, right? The summer of Presley, where you're like, I've done it, I've sold the business, and you went on some fun adventures with your family and just kind of celebrated, which was so cool to see. And yet, now in this last year, you've continued to try and say, okay, what do I do going forward? And it's funny because I think the question that always gets asked is, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? Like, what bigger, better, more powerful, more intense? Like, what's the next? Like, you conquered this. Now, what hill are you going to climb? And your attitude has been, well, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if I need to go bigger or better. I don't know if I need to conquer everything. And yes, the question gets annoying, and I'd like to have an answer for it. Like, what are you going to do next? But you don't want to be motivated. You've really been cautioning yourself and kind of saying, hey, I'm not going to make my next move because, there's some sort of worldly pressure to make a next move. I'm not going to do this because my identity is sort of wrapped up in being like this entrepreneur, a businessman. Even some of the at-home stuff where you're like, your wife's saying, what are you going to do? And you're like, I don't know. And there's like that dynamic. And so I think it's been really refreshing to see someone that's not motivated by, the financial services, marketing campaigns, you better do this or that, and kind of thinking about the machine or the man. And yeah, you do have some financial time, which is different than a lot of people. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about like that struggle or that joy, whatever that is.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that is one of those areas where I think we don't realize how much we've been discipled into that by the world. Like, we've been told that progress, is the next step, and usually
Up and to
that
the right,
progress
yeah.
needs to be, well, and it's the way I would add to that would be up and to the right in a particular area, which would be your career, your finances, your retirement account, your that's the up and to the right they're talking about. Well, but as believers, like my up and to the right doesn't start there. It starts with my faith, my family, and this gives me opportunity to spend more time on up and to the right with my kids, right? Um, or with my wife. And so I think that's the part that this time has allowed me to wrestle with. And it's not like I didn't, I didn't quit my job like a college football coach and say I'm, to go spend more time with my family. I'm really proud of how I balanced owning a business and raising young kids. Like we prioritize that, but yeah, it just doesn't mean I have to all of a sudden go more up and to the right than I already am.
Well, and those of you, just so everybody knows, Presley is not a lazy guy. So in case there's any thought of like, oh yeah, this guy just doesn't want to work. No, I mean, Presley is a super diligent, hardworking, disciplined guy. But he's also a guy that doesn't want to be like told what to do by some entity or some pressure or some kind of reality out there that is not necessarily got him or his family's best interest in mind. And this is something that you've been actually practicing throughout. Where I remember talking with Presley one time. This may have been 15 years ago, and you had said that I don't know if you came up with it or someone told you, but someone said, instead of trying to really hope for a long retirement, take a lot of little retirements as you go. And I just thought that was such a revolutionary idea, because there's no guarantee you'll be alive when retirement age comes, let alone you'll have money to do things. So take retirement with your family. So, every once in a while, just, have the summer of Presley where it's like, we're going to go. And this is just a retirement moment with my family, but I'm far from retirement or whatever. Tell us a little bit more about some of those thoughts.
Yeah, well, balance is key in all of this, right? It's these mini retirements can suck you in, and all of a sudden you find yourself really enjoying streaming shows or something during the day. I get, so just there is the draw the draw to both extremes, and I think finding that balance over the years has just been an ongoing marathon battle. And those mini retirements, whether they were like a weekend away or they were 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 4 months, that was one way I found balance in this. Because it's just, I'm watching my son, for example. He's 18, and everybody asks him the same questions about what he's going to do, and everything that they ask, and it's out of the best intentions, but he's overwhelmed by this sense that there is this set path he needs to follow to achieve success. And it's funny to be going through it a little bit at the same time as him. I'm getting asked these questions too right now. But we just, again, back to that idea that the world disciples us in so many ways around work, tech, which we'll get to, and faith, that you don't even realize how strong that is. And the questions are just coming at you, and they're driving at something. And if you don't say like, hey, if you just swim in those waters year after year and you don't take these little breaks from it, I think, you get swept away.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this phrase that when I went and lived in Gales Point, Belize, where basically like the no running water. I mean, the pace of life was I mean, it probably, I couldn't say neutral, but it was first gear, and I'd spent my entire city life in the States with fifth gear, and maybe like every once in a while vacation would be fourth gear. And then all of a sudden now I'm living in, just above neutral, and after being there for so long, I just realized the pace that that I had been formed into. You know, I didn't even know I was doing fifth gear and fourth gear. I thought I was doing fifth gear and neutral on vacation. I was so far from that. So living there was such a gift. They taught me so much about pace. And I came back to Phoenix and started the Saturday night service at the church. And one of my big things was, you know, we have to resist the gravity in Phoenix that is constantly pulling us into superficial and artificial activity. And one, because if we don't, we'll wake up 5-10 years down the road and realize we've only been existing. We haven't been doing any living. And that really became this like big premise for, you know, that community and kind of my life from that point on was like, I do not want to wake up someday and just realize what was I even doing for the last 5 years or 10 years or God forbid my entire career. Like I was just doing what I was told from somewhere, somehow, and I was just existing, and I really wanted to live, you know. And I think we always talk about at Living Streams that God doesn't want to make you good at church. He wants to make you good at life. And it's just so hard, obviously, because we're in the church world, but no matter what it is, he doesn't just want to make you good at work. He wants to make you good at life. He doesn't want to make you just good at tech. The goal is living, you know, like living to the full, as Jesus said. And so I love, you know, this idea, and living is not just vacation, or like work is living as well. Church can be living as well. It's all mixed together. But I do think that we get so caught up in the rat race that we don't. And I love that you're saying, well, every once in a while you just need to quit it all and just kind of like take stock.
Yeah. Kind of like fast.
Yeah, Presley, I thank you for sharing your story. And I think there's so much of this that is resonating with how I'm sort of thinking about my life and this decision. And, you know, I'm curious if you're willing to share. I feel like there's two sort of underlying tactical, maybe even drivers that sit beneath the decision here of where do we go from here. One is around the idea of providership and feeling like, okay, well, you know, in some contexts, we still have to pay the bills. We still have to, I got to do something here. And wrestling with that and this idea of like, what's enough mean and look like, and how do we kind of really think through that? And then the idea of purpose, like, okay, well, obviously raising these children, building the family, there's a great deal of purpose there, but how do we think about the purpose of our work, even in this new chapter? So I'm wondering if you're willing to share any sort of wrestling that you've had with kind of those two concepts as well.
Yeah. I mean, the provider thing is crucial, and I can't answer that question for everybody and how they're going to do that for their families. But I'm very, it's the Bible's very clear on the husband's role as a provider for his family. I think, that's critical. I don't have answers for everybody on how they're going to do that. I'm wrestling with it on how to do that for my family. As far as purpose goes, I think I'm finding that most people are more, including myself, are more likely to start out seeking that purpose in the way that the world wants me to. And so I'm trying to start out from the other end and then kind of hold that at bay as long as I can, because I know that's going to be there. I get that question almost every day, including from my wife. What exactly? Like, I went and got my certification as a pickleball coach. Okay. That costs money. I love playing pickleball. Love playing pickleball with David before he got hurt, and he's going to get back to us soon. Hopefully.
Yeah, buddy.
But like, okay, my wife, rightfully, she's like, okay, so you're a coach. Are you going to make money doing that? I'm like, well, I don't know. I just enjoyed getting certified, and I love the people in the community and being around those people. So again, the two words like purpose and priority are really the two that I'm constantly battling with. It's like, my wife and I's calling, I believe, at the beginning of our marriage was to set up a new kind of like a branch of our family tree that pointed toward Christ.
Mm.
So that's always been an overarching purpose for me.
Mm.
And I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I grew up in a wonderful home, but not a Christian home. And so that's been a purpose for me. So if I can take a piece of the purpose I was using for my business and apply that more to this purpose of this family tree branch, even if it's just for a year, like, I mean, I'm not gonna, like David said, I'm not gonna look back and go, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So I know that's vague. It's not very tactical. I think I'm just watching for situations where the world's purpose is trying to hammer at me to do something bigger and more in their eyes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to dive into that. You described, right now you feel like there's a real clear way that the world's trying to get you to answer these questions, and you're trying to not, do that, but instead try and go at these questions in a way that is more like what God would want you to do. Can you describe a little bit of what those are? Like how would you describe the world trying to dictate how we answer these questions versus God's way? And I know you're in the midst of that, but like, what are some of the things you've learned so far?
Okay, I lost a little bit of your audio, but I think I've got it.
Okay.
The I actually had an idea earlier this year, starting up a business and built the website, etc. Got the LLC going and did the basics of it, but didn't really get to the point where I was investing a ton of money in advertising or any of that, bringing on staff. And there was a huge shift from the 9 months before that, when everybody knew I was not everybody in my community, they just had stopped having that conversation with me. But then when they asked and I said, "Oh, I'm starting this. I'm kind of looking into starting this new business." I mean, it was like so much interest all of a sudden. Like, oh, tell us about that. Show us the website. What are you going to be doing? What's your role going to be? Who are you hiring? Which is great if you're starting the business, but it also was like a check, like, oh, it's just much more natural for everybody in the world and me. I felt better. I was like, oh, hey, I'm starting this business and I got this website and I'm doing this. And it's much more natural as a man, 47 in America, to start telling people you're doing that, than I went and got certified as a pickleball coach. And I built this relationship with these people there that's really meaningful. And I feel like I'm making a difference just spending time with these folks who, are going through X, Y, and Z that I have time to spend time with on the pickleball court. Is that so?
Yeah.
Yep.
It feels very personal and timely in that when we started this podcast, I was sort of consulting and just kind of figuring things out. I had time, and then over the last 2 weeks, I did a couple things. One, and by the way, quiet, right? No emails, like no texts, like it just completely kind of isolated, which in my sort of inner life turns into anxiety and what's going on. And about 2 weeks ago, I updated my LinkedIn profile. I started interviewing, getting towards the tail end of processes. And the lie I am sort of believing is, oh, I am now like relevant again, or something to that end.
Relevant.
And
Yeah,
this
good
idea of
word.
like relevance is almost, I'm saying this as a confession more than anything, feels like a drug, in the sense of I'm not alone, I'm not isolated, I have meaning. And so it's interesting hearing you say that, of like, how do you sort of intentionally hold that at bay? How can you rise above that temptation or that kind of thought life and think about almost like living in the intersection, living in the wilderness, and finding a path to um, a deeper sense of meaning that we know only Christ can give us, and giving
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit kind of more space to work in that like quiet versus the the noise and distraction of, again, interviewing and posting and telling our peers and so on. So I think there's something really meaningful there.
Such a good word, relevance, Anthony. That's such a good, that gave me chills. It's like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel.
Well, I think, I mean, obviously there's a biblical word, Sabbath, right? That I think, Presley, you and I have talked a lot about, and I think the idea of every week, God wrote it in and say, hey, well, I want you to work for 6 days, like get your nose to the grind and work, and produce something that will be like a garden for humanity, human flourishing. Like that's the work that we're supposed to do as humans. And 6 days you shall work, and I always joke that like sometimes I think the millennials need to hear that part of the sentence. And then the boomers, it's like, and one day you shall rest. They need to hear that part of it or whatever. And Gen X, we just have it perfectly balanced, Just kidding. But yeah, so 6 days you shall work, but then one day it's like pick your head up and make sure you're headed in the right direction. Make sure you enjoy what's just been done. Make sure you breathe. Make sure you give your body time to catch up with your soul, and your soul time to catch up with your spirit, and your spirit time to catch up with your body. And so you can be whole again, and you can spend time with your family, and you can get to know the people around. Like it's just one day that you're supposed to do this. But I think that's a big part of what Sabbath is obviously like it belongs to God. So there's a connection with your maker. But it's such a reorienting, it's such an establishing, it's such a moment where you're just supposed to breathe and be like human being. 6 days you're human doing, and then one day you're human being, is kind of what it's like. And that's just really tough in our, connected lives where we're constantly connected and all those things. But then he was even talking about like every 7 years, there's supposed to be a rest, for the land and all of that. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about that because it's interesting thinking about Sabbath almost to some extent as a season as well, in that, again, the shadow side of my description is I've been in the wilderness for 2 years, searching, trying to find meaning, and when I'm sort of, again, thinking below the line on that, it feels like a loss of purpose or meaning. But I'm curious if like above the line thinking of that season is, okay, God actually has me in this moment to rest, to become a pickleball coach, to build relationship, to do things that may be something I do for the rest of my life, or it may be something that I have this like moment that I get to rest and recover and reflect on the last season and be prepared for what might happen next. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for us, certainly for me, to be like, okay, when's this over? I'm excited, but when is the next one coming? But I wonder if there's there's some theology kind of weaved into this around, okay, maybe, gosh, this is actually an invitation.
Well, and I think that's what the idea is. Cease from productivity is another way to look at Sabbath. Like 6 days you work, and then one day you stop being productive. What are you talking about? It's like the only way we can get some of us to rest is to teach us how productive the rest can be. And it's like we're losing the whole plot at that point already, because we're especially in America, Protestant work ethic, all of that type of stuff that's been driven into us. Exactly the questions that you've been asked, the questions your kids being asked. It's just this incessant, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do? What work are you going to do? And if you're not working, it's so ingrained and formed in us. And then God comes and just says, hey, I want you to cease from productivity 1 day a week and 1 year every 7, so to speak. And it's like, oh my goodness, we just grind, and then we pretend that there's this retirement at the end where then I'll rest and I'll enjoy it. And if you spend too much time in rest, you're not going to enjoy that either. And no one's going to enjoy you either if it's too much time in rest. Yeah. But I do think this whole idea, like you said, Anthony, I'm with a lot of people when the the shoe drops or whatever, or like their world kind of crashes. And it's funny, there's a part pastorally in me that's like, okay, yes, like we can grieve this moment. We want to get out of this wilderness or season as fast as possible. But I also want to tell people, but don't miss what this time's about. And it's real easy to say. And then all of a sudden, my whole body, the last 2 years, my thyroid, my back, my sciatica, I'm just like shot physically. And I've spent so much time in my life trying to rest mentally, emotionally, like take care of my soul, that I think I'm not hitting midlife and having some sort of existential crisis or mental breakdown or emotional explosion. But I've realized I don't think I've ever given my body any rest. And so when I've asked the Lord about this time and said, God, what do you see and what do you say? I feel like that's the word that he gave me was, you're resting for the future. And I'm miserable. I hate it with a passion. And I want out of this season so badly. And I've run to surgery. I've run to, steroid shots. I've run to physical therapy. I'm trying anything and everything. I'm taking all these vitamins, like I'm doing everything to speed myself out of this process, which again, I'm not saying any of those things are bad. And
Right.
and I don't exactly know what's happening, so I'm getting help from others that know better. But at the end of the day, the Lord told me, this is my time to refrain. This is my time to rest my body for the future. And so somehow maybe I'll get everything back. Maybe I won't physically, but I can at least rest my body because I want to make it to 80. My parents didn't make my dad made it to 48. My mom made it to 53. So my kids don't even know what grandparents are in that regard. And so my goal, like you said, Presley, like what I want to change in my family tree is I want to be a grandpa. Like people ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I want to be a grandpa. It's the weirdest thing in the world. And then they don't want to talk to me anymore. But it's like, that's literally my goal in life, is to be a grandpa. And so the threats that I'm experiencing right now to that dream, I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm going to settle in, I quit basketball. I'm quit pickleball, even though I want to get back out there. Pickleball. Like, what kind of weird human man can't go out there and play pickleball? Like, that's how broke down I am. But I'm trying to be in this season and get the rest that the Lord wants for my body. And if you remember, biblically, the whole story of Daniel is the people of Israel did not give the land the Sabbath rest for all that time. And so God basically violently removed them from the land, took them into exile in Babylon, so the land could get the rest that he wants it to have. So even in that sense, it was just such an interesting thing. And he took care of them in Babylon, and then eventually brought them back after 70 years. But if you add it up, it was like 490 years they didn't do the Sabbath rest, which is 70 years. So they took them away, and God got his Sabbath rest and took them back to the land. It's just fascinating how serious God is about rest and giving the creation the rest that it needs. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. And that's been a topic of conversation for us for a long time, Presley. And I think, Anthony, you and I too, where it's like, there's something happening in this time that's really important too. And speeding your way out or being miserable in this season is not what the Lord's asking, for sure.
No,
Yeah.
you can't. And in this season in particular, everything is changing so fast that your ability to try to keep up with it is, almost like a fool's errand to some extent. And so
Yeah.
I think, even for folks on, in the secular kind of world, like there is this big push to analog and slowing down and offline and all of this. And so I think the sort of like God-shaped hole in all of us is reaching for rest and reaching to slow down.
Yeah, for truth. It's, how old are you, Anthony?
I'm turning 40 this year. So I'm 39.
Okay, all right. So you can kind of, relate to this, but I mean, I think, you just said, and I'm not necessarily pushing back, but you said the pace of change is so fast right now. And I know there's statistics on that, and that the curve is really steepening on how fast technology is being adopted and whatnot. But at the same time, like, I do think people are grasping for those timeless principles that applied back in the .com era,
For sure.
back in the Industrial Revolution. These were, and I think part of that is just looking at AI as another iteration of this concept of
Yeah.
progress. Yeah, it's going faster, but I think we just have to apply those first principles in a way that they applied them back then.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It's not at all easy. I just want to do that, and I need help doing that. And I don't want to use this. I get sucked in to AI the same way I remember getting sucked into email and AOL online
Mm,
back. Like, I
yep.
remember it's like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Um, and I get sucked into it, and I have to be like, just no, that's not how I want to spend my time, or I'm not finding purpose, because I'm not in a time where I'm being paid for my work, but like, I'm a guy who likes to monitor the situation, right? That meme of the guy who's like, don't worry, I'm monitoring everything here.
Yeah.
So I can get sucked into that, and I really have to make sure I'm pushing back and valuing, finding purpose in my time that way. So anyway, yeah, I think we've been here before, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Well, I wanna push this into something that's it's in line, but the whole idea of productivity, the whole idea of working 6 days, but then making sure we rest. Um, I know, on the sermon that I did yesterday at the church. Today's Monday for us. I don't know when you're listening to this, but the sermon that was basically out of Matthew chapter 6, and it dealt with you can't serve God and money. And there were other things as well in there, but that was one of the ideas, that the real wrestling match for humanity, according to Jesus, after spending 30 years with humanity as a human, he says to him, "Hey, you can't serve both God and money." And he didn't say God and all the other things you would think, like God and self. It was like, that seems like that would have been appropriate, or God and the devil, right? Is what we would think, like God and the devil. But he said, no, you can't serve God and money. And then he goes on to really talk about anxiety and how much he doesn't want you to be anxious, because God's going to take care of all of that. Like, you don't need to worry about any of that. You serve God, all the money stuff will be taken care of in the way that it's supposed to. And yet there's this tension between God and money always in our lives. And that's what we've been talking about, because ultimately a measure of productivity in our world as Americans for sure is money, is your bank account. And yet there is some reality, like you said, with the providership. Like there is some way that we're supposed to do it. And I love, Presley, what I've heard you answer to that question is, hey, my wife and I've decided to just live a simpler life. It's not like we have all these big, huge dreams and I need to provide for all these big American dreams that my family has or my kids might want. Instead, I need to provide a stable, steady life for my family. And if that means we don't do some extravagant things, or that means we do live a simpler life, why can't we just do that instead of, no, I got to have the bigger house. No, I got to have the newer car. No, I got to go on this vacation. It's like, if we didn't need to do those things, we wouldn't need quite as much money, So I love there is some of that answer in there. And that's a resisting of this pole versus God and money. But one of the things that you've gotten into, Presley, that you've kind of, I think in this whole like search and kind of like recheck of life and making sure you're being motivated by the things that are of the spirit and not just things of the world, it's actually got you into some Bitcoin and crypto kind of world. And you've done a lot of work and study and tried to figure out where the whole reality of money, as we think of money, we've been trained to think of work in a certain way, and we're trying to make sure and parse that out, where's God and where's not God. But even in money, you've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, hey, have we been discipled or formed into thinking about money in a way that is not at all in line with what would be biblical or true or cause human flourishing? So take us into some of that stuff.
I mean, everybody just tuned out. Everybody just Did he just say Bitcoin? Um, yeah, I mean, maybe this is, I don't work in tech, but people view crypto and Bitcoin as being in tech. If I can, what I would say is like avoiding all the investment arguments and all the financial market stuff around crypto and all the grifting and right. If you can just kind of turn that off, I think money, as important as Jesus said it was, right, and as important as it is in our world today, is just vastly misunderstood by um, and because I think we've been indoctrinated in a lot of ways into a way of thinking about it that's not helpful to us, but it's helpful to somebody, just not us. The
Mm,
the commoners, I guess you would say.
yeah.
And in a similar fashion to what you guys talked about on a previous podcast, people are pushing back against this idea of fake content and AI generated content. I mean, you told the story about a guy who was booed for creating a movie that had AI content in it, and it's like people want the analog. They want truth is what they want.
Mm.
And for me, I separate crypto and the thousands of tokens and things that are out there from Bitcoin, which is not only the OG but also created in a different way than all the others. And what I see there is truth and honesty when it comes to money, because I can go in and see how it's created, how much there is, how it's transferred, where it goes when it's transferred. It's very People think it's pretty fuzzy, but it's very clear actually and transparent. There's a fixed supply, et cetera. Without getting into all the weeds, I'm looking for truth and I'm finding true money and honest money in Bitcoin, which I think aligns with biblical values around honest weights and measures too. So that's it's given me some purpose in educating people and talking about it, and it hasn't it's pretty volatile. So from an investment standpoint, that's why I'm trying. Let's avoid that.
Yeah, yeah.
But just this concept of truth seeking is it's just so important in every area of our lives, and obviously money is a big one.
Well, talk to us about like the American dollar and so like if you're finding something different, tell us a little bit about the reality of the American dollar or just dollars in the way that we're understanding and using them, because I don't even know if people ever
Yeah.
thought about what it is and where it came from and what value it actually has and all that. So,
Well, I mean, it's a tool that I mean, people don't they think about it as a tool for an exchange of value between individuals, but it's actually a tool for those who control it and manage it to pull the strings on the economy and on value. And you know, over 40% of the dollars in existence have been printed in the last 10 years. So like your value, what you could buy with a dollar 100 years ago is now over 90% less than what you can buy with it now. Now, when you start looking into statistics like that, what that does to somebody who's um, making dollars, earning dollars, but earning less value, it means that don't quote me on all these numbers because I don't have them in front, but it means that somebody 50 years ago had to work for 8 years to be able to afford a median family home. Well, now that person has to work for 20 years,
mm,
more than double to afford a median family home. And we kind of like talk about, oh, well, my parents bought that home for $50,000. Well, yeah, they bought that home for that. That only cost them 8 years of their life that the system demanded from them in order to afford that home. But your life, 20 years is demanded from you because the dollar you have is worth less than the dollar that they had.
yeah.
So, I'm it's really, for example, made me very cautious about accusing millennials of being, lazy. Like that was kind of a trend for a while.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I just don't do it anymore because the battle they have to fight against the depreciation of their money is a very real thing. Um, and it's tech related because now they can just punch in numbers on a computer. They, being the Federal Reserve, the banks, they can create money out of thin air. And when they do that, Anthony's hat that he's wearing just went from, $15. Now it costs him $25 to get that hat. But more importantly, it costs him another hour of work that he's not with his family. Mm-hmm. Right? So Bitcoin's a piece of technology that I think addresses that. And I'm not an anti-AI guy. I'm not an anti-tech guy. I love when technology can do stuff like that. Disrupt this broken system, offer people a way out. I don't know.
One way that I heard it described is the idea that gold is gold's so valuable right now. It's over $4,000 an ounce, $4,000 an ounce. And the reality is that gold is not becoming more valuable. I mean, gold is just gold. Like, nobody's out there printing new gold. Well, at least they haven't figured out how to do that yet, as far as I know. Right. But I mean, people do still find gold, and so the more that can change it. But the reality is, gold has a certain amount of value, but it's $4,000 an ounce now because the dollar has just lost value. Right. Lost value. When the dollar gets stronger, then gold price would come down because it's just it's how many dollars, right? It's a unit of measurement. And the fact that when all those commodities go up, all that really means is the dollar is becoming less and less valuable. And the reason that the dollar is becoming less and less valuable is because people are doing things like you said, printing more of it, not balance it. When the U.S., every time it doesn't balance its budget, which I think the 90s was the last time the budget was balanced, and that was just for like 1 year, But it's like it's every time we basically take on more debt as a nation, our dollar goes down and down. And when you think of, and this isn't Democrat or Republican issue, this is from George W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump, like their way of solving whatever crisis or whatever situation is just print more money. And so
they're stealing from you when they do that. That's what people, it's dishonest. Yeah. Right? They're telling you you're receiving a benefit for that, but they're stealing. Yeah. And so they're stealing your time in addition to your money, because you have to work more for it.
I hadn't thought about that connected the time issue. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah,
for sure.
Because that's what I've been talking to my daughter, who's 20 right now, all the time, is like, hey, and this is what I'm telling her, is I'm saying, hey, it's okay. You still have great opportunity. You still have, a real shot to get to some middle class type life. You're just going to have to be a lot smarter for a lot longer and work harder for longer. And that's okay, right? Because still the American dollar is probably the best dollar out there. Still, America is giving a lot of opportunity that other people would love to have. But yeah, you are going to have to stick with it a lot longer. But what's sad is that it's our leadership's decision making and the way that they're going about God and money, potentially, that's actually not allowing for more human flourishing, but instead they're wanting the quick fix and just kind of spend their way out of things. And it's not a good trend, and it's not going to end well if we keep going, for sure. But
no, we should. So so that's the money side of it. I think one of the other R words for me in this season is the relationships. You talked about the anxious, right? You said, with the love of money, but also starts with don't be anxious about anything. God loves you. He's taking care of things. One of the ways that I feel that from the Lord and during this season has been really a beautiful thing for me, has been, how do I keep my anxiety level down when I'm feeling that pressure to be relevant, to be productive? Like, it's all been my primary and then secondary relationships that have given me that relevance. Even tertiary ones. It's funny. a couple of months after I'd sold the business, I did summer of press, came back. My wife started sending me to the store more often because I was available to go to the store more often. I I went into Costco and I I I stopped and I talked to the guy who stands there when you scan your card in for like 7 to 10 minutes. And I walked away from that and was like, what just happened? I I I feel very alive right now having talked to this guy. He was smiling, I was smiling. We made a connection. I went home and I told my wife, like, I feel like parts of me that had died have come alive again in relationship
Mm.
now that, in this season. Um, and so I've really been trying to not only stay in that while I have this blessing of a season where I don't have to earn money, but also thinking about the next step. How do I maintain that? I was so bad about that when I was working. If I was actually at work, I was not talking to the Costco guy. I mean, I was talking to somebody if they were going to buy a service from me, or if they were already a customer from me, or if they were my employee. But if it was that periphery group, no, I was just going past them. And that's to my own sin and confession on that. Like, it was just, a part of me had died there, and I was not treating other people the way I should have been. So to see that come back and not want to lose that again, I'm like, man, I don't want to I was telling Anthony, I don't want to take my next role or whatever I do next, quote unquote, productively, but for work and paid work, and be on a computer using AI sitting in my room by myself.
Yeah.
Like, these relationships are so valuable, all of them. My family was always the one that got what I had. My secondary came after that. But like, all of these relationships are so valuable. To be able to engage with humanity daily like that, we've lost so much of that. And I had lost so much of that over 13 years that it just broke my heart. And I'm like literally telling my wife, I'm coming alive again. Like, I was dead.
That's cool.
And so I don't know. That was just something I wanted to make sure I brought up because of relationships. Being able to be in those has been such a blessing, and I don't want to lose that when when I get paid work again.
Yeah. Well,
And
I think
AI draws you away from that a little bit. It can. It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
I just want to be aware of it. I just want to, like, nope. I don't want
Well,
to just make $1 billion sitting on my computer in my room. I do not want that. That's not.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the proponents of AI, when they describe the utopia, right, the AI utopia that they're aiming for and they're selling, is like that you want AI to be unfettered and achieve and accomplish everything it can, because if AI can really do everything it's supposed to do, it will create this utopia where basically the government will have so much money because everyone's become so productive that the government, instead of you having to work, the government will just issue $1 million a year to every single person in the nation, and so you won't have to work for money anymore. You'll just be able to go and do all the things that you want to do.
The
It's
post work era.
Well, yeah, and Anthony, I feel like, Anthony, you've been in that tech space for many years, and it's interesting. You hear stories and profiles of people who are successful in that space. I don't know what the relationships look like.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's how much of a draw technology is at the peak of like progress and pace, and what have you seen when it comes to relationship success or fallout?
I mean, I think there's both a pessimistic and optimistic view of this. I think that I have, like, I think certainly in a world where, the greater Silicon Valley, not tied to the location, but there's this definitely like meritocracy, deep sense of network of who do you know. Um, and so the sort of like risk of feeling irrelevant is you really lose a lot of relationships or seemingly. So, which by the way, like calls into question whether those are real kind of deep relationships or not. But I've definitely felt that firsthand. An interesting anecdote is I can almost directly tie the amount of real either in-person relationships or phone calls to whether or not I post on LinkedIn. Because if I don't post on LinkedIn, I'm off the grid, and then the relationships quote unquote sort of suffer. So I think that's kind of a like pessimistic, maybe realistic kind of view. I will say the one thing that we do pretty well as an industry is really, and maybe this is not a universal statement, but invest in creating a company culture. And there's probably a whole book or chapter to write on like startup culture as church, which is a bad thing to be clear, but there's a sense of values, right? There's a mission orientation. There's like a patron saint leader who we follow into this kind of mission. And so again, a lot of bad there to be clear, but the good that comes from it is relationship, in that you're working alongside people who you care about, who you're building kind of a shared sense of experiences with, who you're achieving together with. And so in its best state, I would say there's some good here. But again, there's a lot of bad cultures or companies that don't invest in that as well. So I guess I have found, maybe in reflection, I guess, that as a believer, like working at a startup, let's say, or a technology company that may not be a expressly Christian organization, but has like a good sense of values that are aligned to my convictions as a believer, um, uh, it feels pretty good, and there is a healthy sense of fulfillment there. And to be honest, like, again, not to make this about me, but that's kind of my decision to get back into like not going down the entrepreneurial route anymore, but being a part of a community, is relationships. I think that's actually the primary driver for why I'm sort of interviewing and looking to get back into a role. It's to build a team, it's to be around other people, and to not feel so sort of alone as like a single consultant kind of, working from home. So
yeah, cool. I hear you.
Yeah, I think somewhat of your question, like I think no matter what we've seen in human history is whenever there is an entity, whether it be a government or even a company, because we're in this interesting era now where some of these companies actually have more power and influence and even money than the US government, which is just this wild kind of interesting world we're living in. And especially if, OpenAI or Anthropic really continue to develop, and if there is this like great like productivity explosion, I mean, they could literally be running the world. There's a clear path for that, and the government, I think, is trying to manage that as much as they can. But no matter whether it's a company that has the best values and best intentions, or it's a government that has the best values and intentions, I mean, basically what they're describing as this utopia is just a refresh on communism to some extent too, or some sort of socialism where, you all work for this one entity because this entity is so great and wonderful and powerful, and it provides you with all you need for life. And then you just interact and you have way more leisure and way more, and it's a nice idea, but it's caused the most, devastating realities in human history. So I think we can't be fooled by that idea again. And what they're trying to sell, again, might sound good, but all it is there's a few people at the top controlling everything, and much power, corrupts much. There's just no doubt about it, because of this wrestling match between God and money. And if we make productivity, if we make money, if we make leisure, if we make anything else the highest priority instead of God, we're always going to end up dehumanizing. We're always going to end up, creating the opposite of human flourishing. But if we can get in line and say, hey, no matter what comes, and I love Anthony, they're like, well, why don't I go be a part of this thing? Because we can shape the technology. We can instill, Christian values. We can define what humanity is and what human flourishing is. We can warn against, hey, this is starting to sound very communistic, or this is sounding like one of those ideas that people bought to their peril before. Studying history is so important. We were talking about primary sources in one of the podcasts. Is like not just understanding the world as AI is telling us, not just understanding the world as the algorithm is forming in us, but actually being rooted in something that is, and that's what's so great about the Bible, is because it's outside of humanity. It's God breathed. And it's just such a valuable, important thing for us to stay rooted in, because and I love the commercial. What was it? It's what's the Elon Musk company?
Tesla?
Or SpaceX,
Tesla?
maybe.
SpaceX?
Or something. Yeah. I forget what it was, but basically he did this whole advertisement where there's a scientist from like the 1950s, and he's like, I don't know what the future is going to have, but I know it's going to be wonderful. And I love that attitude. I think that is a good attitude, especially when you think about how much God loves humanity. Like, we got nothing to worry about. God is the one who is going to care for humanity and make sure human flourishing is possible. But there are things that we need to navigate for sure. There are going to be challenges. There has been challenges historically. There will be. We joked about, celebrating America 250. Well, that's awesome, except for the fact that in human history, every empire only lasts about 300 years before its major downfall. So it's like, let's make it a good 50. It's great for us, midlifers, because we're going to be gone right before it drops. But that's kind of a cynical way to say it. But I think, again, being rooted in the scriptures, being rooted in relationships, finding our relevance in what God calls relevant instead of what, these algorithms or like the other formations that we're trying to do, really balancing out that God and money relationship. And I loved it because in some ways Jesus is saying, if you're having anxiety, it's probably because you're starting to get a little bit out of whack.
Yeah.
You've got money a little bit above God. And again, he's not saying money's bad or evil and you should hate it and run from it. He's just saying it's really going to always be competing for your allegiance. It's going to want you like a God wants you. It's going to want all of you. It's going to say, love the Lord your money, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we are so prone to that. We are created to worship. And if we're not careful, we'll go that way. And again, that's why I love the pause that you guys have had in your life. I love Presley, that Presley is just always a fighter. He's just always trying to fight what is coming. That's his first response to everything is like, wait a second. And I just love that so much. And we go to history movies all the time to try and learn all that stuff. Anthony, it's been so fun walking with you and watching you be so honest and real in this time, and really trying to move forward as God leads. I mean, the fact that you were like, I'm going to go to seminary so that I can make a better decision going forward. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And yeah, I've been really enjoying this summer. I've really been enjoying this podcast. I'm so glad to hear from you guys. And it's time to wrap up, as you can tell. But any final words from you guys before we jump off?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I just want to applaud you both. I mean, I was thinking back to COVID as, kind of a recent example of an opportunity for the church to face a situation where their voice was really important. And I think this is another situation like that. And you guys are taking that bull by the horns and saying, hey, the church has a lot to say here about AI. And when I say AI, I don't mean that the church knows how to run OpenAI or Anthropic. Like, I mean, the church has those things that you just said, David, to say, and the things Anthony has been saying on this podcast to say, and hopefully maybe a couple of things I said, but like, use that. I mean, it's just so important that the church speak into this, and I appreciate you guys doing it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that wraps up this podcast today. And again, thank you so much, Presley, for your time, for your friendship, for all the chats we've had. I'm excited about doing the next 45 years with you as well. And we'll be back next week with our next podcast. God bless you out there. Hope you have a good time thinking about some of these things today. And hopefully, you'll spend some time with the Costco guy as you walk in. All the best.
Amen.